Good morning and welcome back to the second video in the series regarding the Suzuki M109 or C109 engine. In this video I'm going to be stripping the engine down, looking at the gearbox failure and also looking at the actual proper modification for the oil system. There's a few different modifications out there. We'll go through those, but we'll also show you the actual proper fix for it. Now, it's not convenient. You need to strip the engine right down to get the oil jet that needs to be modified to do the correct fix for the oil in the chute. As always, we start this job right, clean work area, cup of tea. Okay, we spoke about last time how this was quite a big heavy engine, and yeah, you can lift it by hand. I strongly suggest you don't, not if you want your back to survive past you into your old age. But this is the rig I use, so it's just a fairly cheap crane from Super Cheap. 1200 crane, gives us 500 kilos on its furthest extent, and I just lift it from the lower front mounts. Being careful with this chain, make sure that if you do this type of setup and use this chain, make sure it doesn't come across and hit your thermostat housing, because that's fairly fragile, just an aluminium housing, so it'll break that if it puts any pressure on that. And then on the back, same sort of deal, just to the upper rear engine mounts. Some lifting chain and load leveler to get the pivot points. Now the pivot point or the weight of this engine, as we spoke about before, is round about the centre of the V. So you want to try and get your lifting point at the centre of the V. So if you've got one of these load levelers, that'll help in that. Now you want this engine as empty of oil as possible, so I've gone ahead and took off the oil filter and reopened the drains again. You can see the drains have got little chip detectors in them, little magnets in them. Usually one of the early signs that you've got a failing second gear, you'll start to see little chips in there of ferrous metal just sticking to that magnet. So if you come to do an oil change and you can see that, then it's time to go really gentle on that gearbox. This assembly here is the oil cooler, which passes water through the oil. Suzuki, in their wisdom, decided to use a proprietary thread on the oil filter, so you have to buy the oil filters from them. Anybody, if you found one that fits it, there isn't a Suzuki one, give me a yell. Be careful with these, they're not very tight, and if you break it, it's really you're gonna have to go and get a new one from Suzuki. It's not a part that you can just get off the shelf somewhere. So it's just a tube with two different threads, one on each end, and that leaves you the spacing for your oil cooler there. So you can see different thread on the far end. So as you can see, we're already starting to build a bit of a tray apart. So what's the next steps? Well, let's get the rest of the oil out of it, get the remaining water out of it. And then we're going to start by taking off the drive shaft assembly. Then the next thing we need to do is take off the clutch cover. Now take the clutch cover off before you try and do the generator cover. So, and I'll explain why when we come to put all that back on. So you want to take it apart in the order that you're going to put it back together. So that'll be the next thing to come off. After that, we need to take off the rear cylinder. We need to take off this breather box. And the reason we have to take these off is so as we can get to the bolts that sit inside the V, the back of the cylinder. First job, take off the shaft drive. Otherwise, I'm going to for your gears. I'm going to gears. Very important that the shims that come off go back on. Don't forget a shim, otherwise you won't have the correct spacing for your gears and you'll start to wear out your gears in your shaft drive. Okay, for the next job we're going to pull off the clutch casing. Okay, if you're lucky it'll come off nice and clean. Yeah, it's unusual, usually it sticks off. Okay, the next steps are generator cover. When you're taking this out, there's some gears at the front for the starter clutch, so they might drop out, so just be careful you don't drop and lose any bits. So always got to keep it nice and clean around, and that way there's nowhere for bits to go when you drop. It's also very difficult to get this casing off. There's a fair bit of pull with the magnets on the generator. Bit of a tap around so you get it moving. Don't be tempted to stick a metal screwdriver in here, because you're likely to damage the engine if you do that. It's only a soft case. If you're going to stick something in there, use something plastic, so it's not going to damage the aluminium. You can really feel the pull of those magnets. Right, there we go. Okay, so you can see that's the shaft and the spacer, and that's about it. So the starter clutch itself stayed in there. Bear in mind when you put it back together how these go. So you got your starter clutch, you've got a washer on that side and there, you've also got a little bush in here which you need to get out, and the idler gear sits on this shaft. So we'll look at that when we put the engine back together. Okay, it's probably worth taking the clutch push tube out now, which is in here. You can see it's got a broken oil seal by the looks of it on there from the back of the casing, and you can see through there's an oil seal that this goes through, and we'll talk about that oil seal in depth later, because that is very important that it goes in the right way around. Right, for the next step, we'll take off these water tubes. Okay, the next step now is to start removing the rocker cover box, and then we'll continue on with the head. They do have a sequence in which you need to take these off, and it's written on the actual rocker box itself. Now, if you use the seals, you definitely take off, because it can stick, especially on fires. It means it's going to be quite hard to stretch it. They can use these, it's obviously bad not to, as long as you can use these rubber boxes. And next, obviously, put the wrist on the top of the centre, and you want to pressure straight. To do that, we look through the inspection here, and there's a line which says RC and F2. Okay, so that's RC. Now, we'll just put the camera there. Okay, so you can see in there, I don't know if you can see that, there's a, oil started to cover it now, but there's a line in there, it says RT, and then there's two spikes, and you have the line running between the two spikes. And you want to know you are actually on your compression stroke, because you're going to have number 1 on the front of the rear head, and in line with the rocker. Okay, now that we know that we're on our compression stroke, there's no pressure on the valves, so we can start to disconnect our cam carriers. And again, there is a sequential number printed on there to tell you what order you need to take these off. Okay, we want to go ahead and release the tension on the cam chain, so that's by removing this cam chain tensioner back here. Okay, we'll move back now and then remove the camshaft carrier and the camshafts. We now need to remove the head. Now what's really important here is underneath these caps there's shims for each one of your valves. We don't want the caps to fall off and the shims to come out. We want to really keep those in there. There's no need to do anything with them when we put the engine back in. We'll just put back in as is. So when we take the head off, don't just turn it upside down and allow them to fall off. Try and keep it up the right way. Now for these, there's 6 main bolts, then there's 2 small bolts on the outside, and what I always do is start with, I think the manual tells you the same, is start with your outer small bolts, then go to your 2 extremes, and then go in a crisscross pattern. Now there is a water hose that goes between the 2 heads, which we'll need to disconnect now. Now as the head breaks free, remember keep it upright, place it on your bench. Okay, one thing I did forget there, you've got your cam chain guide, so really you should put this off before taking the head off. It's just 2 10mm nuts. We can now go ahead and take out the other cam chain guide. And now we can take out the cylinder. Now when we're taking the cylinder out, just be careful try not to let the piston drop and hit too hard on the case of the engine. So again, you're probably going to need to give this a bit of a tap. Before we can take the barrels off, there are 2 10mm nuts that sit just under here. And they might be a little bit tight, might need to give them a little bit of a tap. Straightforward coming up. Before you take it up all the way, hop around either side with a rag or something, And what we want to do is we just want to stop that piston from banging down into anything. So just put it through here, and it just provides something for the piston to just rest on as we pull off the cylinder or the barrels. Now these pistons only go one way. You've got a dot on them. You can see that there. There's a little dot, and that goes towards the exhaust. Again, that's in the manual, so you should be able to see that from the manual. So the next step is to pull out the little clip and take the piston off. We'll just use a little spike, get in there. You can pop the clip out relatively easily. Gonna try and keep that piston from bouncing off anything too much. They're not that fragile, but it's worth just as good practice. Then draw out the pin. Away comes the piston. Now our next step is to take off the breather box. The breather box, you won't be able to get this in afterwards, so don't make the mistake of putting your barrels back on, your cylinder head back on, time the engine all back up, and then discover you haven't put this on, because you've got to take it all off again. I can tell you that from experience. Okay, now we've exposed all of the bolts that need to come out. There's one in here, one there, those three, these two there. They all need to come out in order to do the engine strip, in order to part your top and bottom case. So next steps are to take those out, then we spin the engine over and we look at what else needs to be removed. Now, you can't really use a crane for this. It's just a case of having to manhandle it. And this is what we'll be using our leveling jack for. As when we turn it over, we want it upside down but supported here. It is okay to rest it on the rocker cover, that's fine, it's not going to do any damage. If you don't have a leveling jack, this is where you would set up where I have the leveling jack, which is just back here. When I have the leveling jack, you just have two axle stands ready to go at about the same height. Okay, next job is clutch removal. The infamous clutch. So these standard stuff. It's 10mm bolts on the springs. Okay, you can tell its clutch is pretty badly worn, and somebody's already done one of the clutch mods. Now, one of the mods that you'll see on the internet is to put these flats, 3 flats on the side of this, the push out for the clutch, to disengage the clutch. And the idea behind that is to allow more oil to come out of this shaft and into your clutch. Now, a lot of people swear by this mod, but I'm going to tell you why it's a bad idea when we get inside the engine. I'm going to show you why that is not a good mod to do. If you don't want to do anything else, if you don't want to strip the engine down, then you can possibly do that to remove some of the clutch judder, but you are actually, by doing that, removing oil from the gearbox. So we'll go through that a bit later as we strip the engine down. So next thing is to get the clutch apart. Make sure you keep all these parts together in a safe place. There's a bearing there, the push out bearing, and then there's a washer in here as well. So we can start thinking about taking off this nut. You can see this has been pretty much butchered. So this is your nut that holds on your clutch basket. It's not the nut that you need to tighten to eliminate the clutch shudder. That's a different nut. I'll show you that one later on. But for now, we'll get this one off, and the easiest way to do that is with a rattle gun. We try and take everything off together. Just keeps it all in the right order before we put it back on. Now, one thing we do need to remove now before we can part this engine is we need to take this secondary cam chain. So there's 2 cam chains per cylinder. You've got a lower cam chain here, and you've got your upper one that we've already took off. You don't need to take this off. All you need to take off is the actual tensioner itself, because as you can see, the tensioner bolt is mounted into the lower casing, and we want to part the casing. Okay, we're now ready to flip the engine over. Now, I usually flip it over the other way, simply because we've got the drum for the big stator for the alternator or generator, and we can roll it over on that without doing any damage. If you roll it over this side, you're rolling it on bare threads and on this spike, so I wouldn't suggest you do that. I suggest you roll it over the other way. There's no pretty way of doing this. It's a pretty ugly job. Now you are going to get some oil and some water coming out the bike out the engine when you do this. It shouldn't cause too much hassle. As you can see, there's quite a lot of oil coming out. Careful, I didn't take the spaces out of the rotating dowels for the barrels, so they fell out as we turned it upside down. bear in mind you're going to have to keep moving the engine slightly. This is going to be a lot harder if you don't have one of these lifts and you're just using axle stands. You're going to have to manually lift it to the height of the axle stand straight off. Now what we want to achieve, we want to get it level. Now we need it level so when we put it back together, the gearbox electrical falls into the correct place. Our next job is to take off the oil sump. Okay, again, probably going to need to give this a little tap. Just to free it on. Now in here we have our oil pressure release. And we'll talk a little bit about this later on. Just be very careful with this. Take it out, give it a wiggle, it's only held in by an O-ring. Now be a little bit careful here because we've got O-rings all around here. It's probably a good time to change these. Also, these are your pickup roses with their filters in them, and you can see it's a dual sump system. So 2 pickup roses. Just keep them full. Again, only held in with O-rings. So if you have a look here, we've got 4 O-rings. Because we're going to take this case in and out quite a lot, and it's probably a really good time to replace these anyway. You're not really going to want to go back into this part of the bike ever again, hopefully. Just pull them out and put them in a safe place. And I think it's time for tea. Okay, so we have a number of bolts we've got to take off underneath. We've got the outer extremities with the 8mm heads. Then you've got your Allen bolts coming in, and then in the centre you've got your main bolts, so there's 6 main bolts. So we'll start with the 8mm, then we'll do the Allen bolts, and then we'll go ahead and do the main bolts. It's off, should be able to pull this motor off. Just exactly how this. Okay. Right. Gotta take this off. There's a piece of structure in there that binds on the back of this gear. Totally forgot. Okay, after about half an hour struggling, managed to get this off. Had to use a puller, put the bolt back in. Unfortunately, you've got to go on these timing lugs. There's nothing you can do. It won't grip around to anything else, so that's the only way of getting it off, fortunately. So, tightened it up with the puller and then gave it a few taps and away it popped. Okay, so now the exciting part. Now we should be able to open it and have a look at the damage in the gearbox. Okay. Okay, so we've got some significant damage on the selector fork. It's worn almost through. So let's have a look at the gearbox and see if we've got any damage. And it looks like we haven't on the teeth. So that would suggest that the damage in this engine, very luckily, is limited to the selector fork. Okay, so what is it that exactly is wrong with this engine? Well, what happens is this gear here, this second gear, as this floats in and makes contact in there, it's only a very shallow pawl that it goes onto. Now what happens is, because it's a real big clunk into second gear, it rounds off both the gear and the pawl inside there. So both of these two ended up round off. Now what happens then is this second gear has a tendency to push outwards as it goes on those, as it rides on those worn out teeth. So then as it's pushing out, it then pushes against the selector fork. So you can see there, that's the second gear selector fork there. And these are all exactly the same part number. And you can see there an undamaged one. So it starts to drive and it starts to cut through on this selector fork. Now eventually what happens, the selector fork will give way, and that's what happened to this one. This is the last engine rebuild that I done, and you can see that eventually it got to the point where it couldn't hold in any longer. They're not really designed to take constant force, and they're definitely not designed to be ground on like that. So the grinding on it will heat it up, it'll get it to a point where it fails. When this fails, it drops through the gearbox, and you can see here there's the rounded off. You can see how it's not a square section anymore, how it's gotten rounded off, and then that's what happens as the parts go through the gearbox. So they basically just break a load of teeth off, and you're left with basically a very, very damaged engine that costs an awful lot of money to get fixed. So with this engine we're actually quite lucky, so we've caught this in early stages. So real early symptoms are, as you're pulling away, it will start to jump out and immediately back into second gear. So it will feel like it's skipping teeth. That is the actual, that's the symptom, the first symptom that you're going to get. Now, when you get that symptom, you're probably much better off biting the bullet and saying, well, might as well get this fixed now, because if you leave it too long, and I don't know how much longer this had to go, it could quite a way through there, and that's obviously been getting quite hot. You know, I don't think this was too far away from that breaking off. Once that breaks off, what happens then is not only do those bits go through the engine, but it allows multiple gears to be engaged at once, because once it breaks off, this is then free floating. Now if you've already got one of the other gear sliders engaged and this free floats and engages, then you've got a situation where you've got multiple gears engaged at once, and the only option it has is to tear teeth off the gears. So this is the issue with the bike. Not massively sure how it managed to stay and get through development like that, but you can see why they're not keen to do these fixes under warranty. When the second gear issues, they'll try absolutely everything they can before actually fixing the issue, and the only way to fix the issue is change your selector fork and change both of these gears. Change both your sliding gear and the gear that it interacts with, that it locks into. So the next thing we'll do is we'll go and have a look at the Suzuki website. We'll find those part numbers and we'll have a look at getting those parts. Okay, we head over to Suzuki Parts House, and it's Suzuki Parts House OEM parts. What you can do from there is you can select the year of your bike. In my case it's 2009. Then you can select here any of your 109, so either your Boulevard M109Rs or your C109. So in my case it's a C109R, which is the VLR 1800. Now if you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see transmission, and that then allows you to order the specific gears that are required. Now it looks a little bit different because we've got the engine upside down, if you remember. So it looks like it's the wrong spot, but it's actually the correct spot up at the top. So what we're looking at here is number 24 and number 22. So number 22 is our second gear. Now number 24 is our third gear. Now the reason we need to change them both is because the second gear doesn't actually spline onto the drive shaft. Second gear runs on a bush, and it's only when this third gear is moved across and then those pawls engage between the two gears that drive is then transferred through this gear into the drive shaft. So they're the two gears we need. So if we look on this, we're looking at 22 and 24. So 22, there's gear 2, and that's $119, and 24 is $127. So you're looking at around, once you've got your gasket sets as well, or your gaskets you want to change, then you're probably looking around about $300 for the parts to do this change or to do this repair. It is worth doing. It's a great engine when it's working properly, but you can see why it's not really practical to put this kind of job into a dealership. The hourly rate just really makes it an uneconomical repair to do. Okay, so now we'll take a look at the oil modification. Now you can see here there's a small oil jet that sits inside the case. Now this oil jet provides the oil for both the gearbox and for the clutch. Now this here is really bad. This is sealant. There isn't a place where it shouldn't have sealant, and I'll show you why. So this is a specific size oil jet designed to just allow enough oil to go through to lubricate the gearbox and the clutch. Now if we come over to the other side of the casing, you can see this is where that jet sits. Now you can see there's galleries in this edge of the side casing, and the galleries go in two different directions. Now the oil from that gallery goes through here and into this bearing. From that bearing it goes through the shaft and it goes to the clutch. So that's where this seal comes into it. Now very important that that seal goes in the right way round. If you put the seal in the wrong way round, what will happen is you'll block the oil off to the clutch completely, and your clutch won't like that. So the oil comes down this gallery into here, through the bearing, through the shaft and onto the clutch. So you can see there, that's where your clutch normally is. And when you make that modification, what you're actually doing is allowing more of the oil to come through here than would normally come through. Now when we look at our casing, say, well, if we're allowing more oil to go this way, to go through into our clutch, then we're depriving oil from this side. Now this side oils your gearbox, so it goes through here, goes into the bearing, through the bearing, goes through the shaft to the other side, goes across, through the bearing, back through the shaft, back to this side. So you can see that the gear that fails is around this area, and this is where your selector fork that fails is located. It's the last part to get any oil. Okay, so by doing the oil pin mod, what you're actually doing is you're reducing the oil that goes to your gearbox, and by reducing the oil that goes to your gearbox, you're most likely going to make this worse. So the correct mod is to take this oil jet and make the orifice larger. Now by making this orifice larger, you're going to increase oil flow to these oil galleries. Now that's going to help in two things. It's going to help your clutch, and it is also going to help your gearbox. So it's quite an easy job to do. All we need to do is we need to pull this out. It's only held in. It's only held in with a bit of a O-ring, so it will pull out. Okay, so we'll pull out this oil jet, and we'll take it over onto the bench. Now there's two things we need to do with this. We need to make all these small holes that are around the outside of this tube. Need to make all of those twice the diameter. And down inside here, I don't know if you're going to be able to see it, but there's a jet. No, I don't think it's gonna. No. So down inside here there is a small hole, a small jet, that we also need to take out to twice the size. Now don't worry when you do this as to what's going to happen for the rest of the engine when you allow more oil to the clutch and gearbox. The oil pressure relief valve, which we took off earlier, will set your oil pressure. So your oil pressure pump will pump oil until the oil pressure relief valve gets to its desired pressure, and then it will start to release oil. So by releasing more oil out of the gallery into your gearbox and clutch, what will happen is your pressure regulator, your pressure relief valve, will regulate the pressure by closing a little bit, and that will then compensate for the oil pressure that has been taken out. So don't worry about low engine oil pressure. You won't get low engine oil pressure. If you did, you get a warning light anyway. So to prevent this from happening, we need to modify this jet.